Hi, welcome. So today I wanted to tune in and talk a little bit about emotional regulation and magic and the ways that those things show up for me in my practice. I really do want to eventually talk about mental health and like mental illness and all that stuff, but that's really not, I don't feel healed enough around that shit to be sharing about it. But there is kind of like a softer window into some of that stuff through the lens of emotional regulation, which is really where I thrive. And emotional regulation for me, I'll just define it, is in the moment being able to have enough control over your emotions to behave with choice. Or having enough awareness around emotions to listen to what they are trying to tell you instead of being overtaken by them. So my journey with emotional regulation started even before my spiritual journey, because of the life that I lived and the things that it did to me, and I needed to be in the world without having breakdowns every day, minute, hour. And so I started looking into healing modalities and all of these different channels of creating space between my trauma that I experienced and how I was able to behave. Because those things were really close for a while. And I feel like there was this sense at some point that I would kind of grow into it, or that as I became an adult, that would fall away. But what I realized by learning about trauma and learning about emotions was that the only way for that experience to fall away was for me to do work around it and for me to really listen to my emotions, practice self-care, and make better choices with integrity. And of course, those things did get easier as I got older because my brain became more developed. I was able to take space from people. I had more experiences where I was learning, the difference between someone who's being nice and someone who's being manipulative, and someone who's super abusive and someone who really cares about me. And I had to learn those things through relationships and therapy and reading about mental health and emotional regulation and inviting that healing into my life instead of what I did for so many years and that I still fall into, which is creating an identity around those reactions and then trying to avoid ever having to unpack that identity. So there is a way that I think about the ego a lot and how the ego really protects us. Ego is spiritual protection. And it's also a really fun way to relate in the world. It's this whole other piece of the human experience. But it also, it has switches and knobs, and what we can do sometimes, and the reason I say this is because this can become integrated in our spiritual identity too. I'll speak for myself. It can become integrated into my spiritual identity if I continue to identify myself with my emotional state as if my emotional state were out of my control. I give my power away. I give my spiritual power away. So this is going to kind of weave in and out. Our spiritual power is mostly belief. So when we talk about, like, if you're like playing a video game and you're like getting little points, and the points that are like building up your mana bar, right? That's the stuff we can make magic with. And the reason it can be kind of complicated to actually do magic and to actually manifest in the world is because we have this cultural concept of, this potion or this wand or this experience that comes into our life and gives us magic. And that idea of magic really does us a disservice. And when we hear these stories, these beautiful stories, I have Joseph Campbell behind me right now. When we talk about mythology and when we talk about magic coming from another place, we're doing what we do, which is externalizing a concept about our internal world so that we can better understand it. When the truth is, the magic does not come from some potion or some experience that's life-changing. It comes from what we believe. And then we get all these cultural messages that we don't have any control over what we believe. That there is some objective truth out there, and in order to participate in this reality, you have to believe it. Which, I mean, that's kind of true because those beliefs do keep us in the third dimension so that we can participate. But in this case, we're talking about beliefs about our emotional self. And so that's one place where we don't really need as much rigidity, because as we move into our magical sense of sovereignty, we are invited to confront the fact that we actually have a lot of control over how we feel. We have a lot of control over how we feel. And that's true in every moment, even the hardest ones. But in the same way that we have a lot of control over the steering wheel in a car, we still have to make sure it's in the right gear. We still have to be sure that our foot is on the right pedal. We still have to watch our mirrors, right? So even though we have a lot of control over our emotion, there are still circumstances around us that we need to be aware of. So if you hear something like, all you have to do is change your mindset, that's really triggering, right? Or it can be. It's triggering for me. I'll say that. Because the truth is that is not always possible. And the piece that's true for me, and that's part of my belief system, is that when it is not possible, that's because there is something here that requires some kind of special attention that will shift. This is so weird. I'm like getting some messages, which is cool. So what I'll say now, that part's closed, is how to emotionally regulate so that you can have a little, don't talk so much about the triggers. We get it. That's funny. Yeah, you all know. So one way that I create control over my emotions is with really clear, concise, and authentic communication. So what I realized about myself was that I had a lot of assumptions about how other people felt about me. And a lot of that was born of something that we call anxiety, which for me has a lot of layers. And those assumptions about how people felt about me felt really true because I am psychic and I know a lot of things, and things are often true when I feel them. And so if I feel someone disliking me or having assumptions about me or projecting onto me, often I get validated about that. And so one way that I emotionally regulate is to check in around how people are feeling, how they're treating me, and to see if my assumptions about their assumptions are true. And if I don't feel safe to do that, I dip out of the relationship or the conversation. I go meditate, I go journal, Because the thing is, what I've noticed is that when relationships are really important and dropped in my life, and it feels safe for me to say, like, I feel projected on, and I wanted to check in about, like, what story you're having or why you're having this feeling. And the thing is, a lot of people really want to hear that. They want to explain themselves. They do have a story. And when they're acting out that story, it serves them to have validation. And there's two ways that you can validate a story for that person. You can either react the way you're expected to react, or the way you're programmed to react, or the way that they're thinking you're going to react, which in the cases of conflict would be like an inflammatory reaction, maybe a lot of crying, or in cases where they're trying to control you, or there's like a manipulative edge to it. It could be doing exactly as they say. Just anything that you would do that would participate in the projection, that would be validating their experience. And that's why they're having that experience, is because we all came to Earth to have that experience of, we're not always 100% comfortable. We are projecting onto people all the time, right? And we do that as a learning experience. So my responsibility as a divine being that knows that is to receive that experience. And instead of playing into the projection, I can reflect it in another way, which is to say maybe a little bit about what I'm hearing in their voice, or say a little bit about how it makes me feel when they talk that way to me, or say a little bit about how they seem to be coming off, and see if that's how they want to be coming off, and see if they want to try that line again. And in order to do that positively, and in order to make it possible, I have to have a sense of deep emotional regulation. Because the thing is, the number one problem for me when it comes to emotional regulation, which is probably why I started with communication as the way that I do it, is that I really cannot control other people's behavior. I really can't control how they think or how they speak. And I can't control how they live their lives. But what I can do is show up to it how I want to. And piece by piece, I take that sovereignty back, not by engaging and engaging and engaging, but by experiencing and experiencing and experiencing, and being really honest about the feedback that it brings up. And what that immediately creates is vulnerability. It gives them the opportunity to hurt me more. It can make people angry. It can cause more conflict. It's not 100% a foolproof method of living an easy life. But for me, it is how I remain in spiritual alignment with who I am. And it's difficult every day to have mercy and grace. But I know that when I am present for my experience and I give feedback about that experience, that there is no way that it's going to blow up in my face. For me, I'm going to be proud of how I showed up, even if they hurt me more, and even if it means losses of relationships. So that's the end of that part. Ugh. And then the other way that I emotionally regulate, and I mean there's so many ways, is tapping. So I tap, I click my tongue. On top of my head's a good one. And in addition, I mean, I have a lot of exercises that I do for my PTSD where I breathe and I meditate and I say certain things to myself. There's like stuff on my phone that I do. Like, I have a lot of that stuff. which maybe I'll go over kind of how I cope with my PTSD. That might be a fun video. But in the situation of just emotional regulation, where I'm just trying to get my spirituality on track, tapping is a really good way. And this is so important to talk about. So when we talked about communication, we're talking about emotion regulation in relationship with others, and then which can be really triggering and is probably the most difficult for me. But when we're talking about tapping or like this kind of emotion regulation, we're talking about embodiment. And embodiment is kind of like a woo-woo word for really experiencing your reality in your body. And the way that this emotional regulation practice of tapping relates to spirituality for me is that I am coming to understand that my body is an instrument that my spirit has brought here. It's an instrument of perception. And my mind is also a part of that instrument. And one of the things that I can do to remind myself, because a lot of my spiritual practice is just remembering that the godliness within me and the godliness within others. And it's really hard for me to feel like I have magical, miraculous powers to save the world when my body is tense and I'm really stimulated and I feel not good. And like what my body wants me to do, because my body does have a little bit of autonomy. It's kind of funny how like sometimes when I'm channeling, which I'm like just learning how to do, I'll release my body a little and my hands will go places. And that's been a really interesting and powerful practice for me. And one of the things that my hands will do is tap. And it's just reminding me that I have a body here. You can also wiggle your toes and ground your feet. And doing these things in the moment, what was really powerful for me when I actually started integrating the practice was that I have an opportunity pretty much every 10 to 20 minutes to remind myself to stay in alignment with who I am. And the emotional blockages to that are immense, and the cultural blockages to that are immense. But I can take solace in the fact that my experiences are valid for what's going on inside of my body. And a lot of my journey has been learning to feel safe in my body. And so embodiment as an emotional regulation practice really pulls us out of disassociation. This is actually really like content warning. But this is content warning about bodily trauma. So if you've experienced any bodily trauma, this might be kind of difficult. You might want to turn it off, take some deep breaths, drink some water. But sometimes when we experience something very painful, we detach from our bodily experience in order to lessen the pain. And this is what's so beautiful, is that it's beautiful that we can do that, because we need to sometimes. None of the survival mechanisms that we have are wrong. That's the thing, is they are always right for whatever situation we're in. But as we learn new and better ways, we get to shift those methods of survival to methods that we have choice around. So, leaving our body. Our first trauma is birth, or one of them. All my past lives are like, we had trauma way before you were born. That's not your first trauma. First trauma is kind of the Big Bang, which is the birth from Sophia, which is us even just coming into material reality. Because we miss our divine connection, of course. But when we leave our body so that we can protect ourselves and we don't know how to get back, then we can lose our spiritual path for a long, 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 long time. And as soon as we land back in our body, I'll say this for me, when I landed back in my body, all of the stuff that my body had been preventing me from, or that my disassociation is kind of a clinical word for it. But I don't want to like align it with actual like mental health. So I'll use more of like a spiritual word for what it was. Cause for me, it was really a spiritual experience. I'll just say like I kind of left my body. And I also do that intellectually too. I leave my body sometimes. But I was really just kind of like out of my body. My spiritual self, the one that has compassion for everyone and that sees the God in everyone, really does have to step aside sometimes. And so that's kind of what was happening, was I was putting this part that was really important to me over here to protect it, because things were coming at me right here and I didn't want that spirituality to get hurt. And so now I'm bringing, this is all metaphors, but I'm bringing it back to center and to experience. And it has a lot of catching up to do with feeling the most important part of my practice, which is grief. I would say that a lot of my emotional regulation is grieving things that suck. And it's really just feeling the feeling of like, wow, this is hard. I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to have compassion. I don't want to love myself. I don't feel worthy of love. And the truth is, those things are really hard. But the hardest part is that I am this cosmic God angel being that came to earth. And I still feel that way. Even though my spirit knows the truth, I have to experience this. And sometimes I have to experience it without any knowledge of why. And the only way to experience those things is to feel the sadness of it and to feel the grief of it. And here's the deal, y'all. When we get to heaven and we come back into divine consciousness and we're all connected again and we're like, we don't have this individuation in order for us to learn and grow. The grief will be gone. Kind of. I got a big resounding no. But these opportunities to grieve won't really exist anymore. And so I do my spiritual journey a huge favor when, instead of making up stories about how I'm right and they're wrong, or how I'm the best and they're unevolved, or I have like a toxified ascension idea, or if I have structural problems in my psyche because of this world, like when I have internalized racism or internalized, I even want to say capitalism, because like fuck that shit, or like transphobia, homophobia, mental health stigma, all of those things that are blockages to connection in the world, or these things that create blockages for connection in self. There is an immense amount of grief in that. And it really is how I am able to show up with love. And I will say that I'm not perfect at it. I really am not. But I do know I'm pretty fucking good at it. And it's because I do the work. A huge part of my prayer and my spirituality and my journey is ensuring that I am taking the time to feel my feelings. Because if I don't take my time to feel my feelings, they explode in my relationships. They explode when I'm weak, when my body is tired and something, triggers me. If I haven't been grieving and I haven't been taking time to feel my feelings about what it's like to be here on earth, I take all of that shit and I put it on other people, right? So I didn't really think about what I was going to say, so I hope that was sensical. I'll say that it's definitely an art and not a science. A lot of this stuff being possible for people does have to do with how much support they have in their life. So, if it doesn't feel possible, I mean, one thing you can do is believe that it's possible. And I know that sucks because it's so hard. It's really hard to do that. But it really is our magical power. And once we're able to shift belief, everything else follows. But one way that you can shift belief isn't just by being like, and like shifting your belief inside. It's by creating affirming external things. So, oh, this is sweet. This is just coming to me now. So there are little mini manifestations that you can do that don't require much magical power or energy, like writing a sticky note that says, I am emotionally present, or I have the ability to emotionally regulate. Breathing is a good one. Starting to just listen to your breath in the moment, start to listen to your heart rate, start to listen to your upset tummy. One of the first things that led me to embodiment was indigestion. I'm like, why the fuck am I getting all this indigestion all the time? I mean, most of it was that I was eating like garbage, but I was also eating like garbage to cope with my reality. So listening to your body is a huge first step, which is a really hard thing for humans to do. And then these little manifestations that are affirming the fact that you can show up in the world in a loving way. One of the things that you can do is talk to people. The children are playing. It's beautiful. And cultivate relationships with people where it's easy to be compassionate with them. If you look around in your life and you have no one that's easy to love, like you feel like it's an uphill battle to try to love the people in your life, then you may want to kind of shift your intention from trying to fix all of these relationships to trying to find relationships that are supportive enough and sweet enough and easy enough for you that when you come to these relationships that are difficult, you have more energy and more examples for how to do that correctly. So, loneliness is really difficult, and that's something that I grieve every day, is how lonely it is to be in this reality. And I can be surrounded by friends and people that are easy to be with and still feel totally alone. So external affirmations are really valuable. That feels complete. I'm really excited for you. Sending lots of love.